In a moment that left the entire nation watching in awe, Judge Gustavo Gelpí called her what no one expected, a rising star. The words echoed through the grand chamber, bouncing off the high ceilings and gilded walls. Carried by a weight that felt almost cinematic, cameras clicked frenetically, flashes strobing like a heartbeat, capturing a moment the country would not forget. Reporters whispered to one another, unable to believe the declaration they had just witnessed. Social media feeds lit up instantly, hashtags trending before the words had even left the room. Rising star, Jasmine Crockett, new era. Every screen, every phone, every viewer was drawn into a story that felt larger than politics. It felt like history in motion. The room itself seemed to lean forward, the energy palpable. Journalists jostled for position, their pens and recorders racing to keep up, while aides and colleagues exchanged quiet, knowing glances. Jasmine Crockett stood poised, calm but unmistakably moved, the corner of her lips hinting at a smile that had been earned through years of unrelenting work. This was not just recognition. It was validation, the kind that resonates deeply with anyone who has ever struggled against doubt, prejudice, or systemic barriers. But the moment was far from simple applause. Beneath the surface, the tension of a nation divided lingered like a shadow. For every cheer, there was a whisper of skepticism. Political opponents muttered under their breaths, caught off guard by the gravity of the announcement. Critics who had long questioned her rise suddenly faced the undeniable. Here was someone whose competence, courage, and integrity could not be ignored. And yet, the drama of this moment was not in the approval itself, but in the question it begged. How had she reached a point where even a federal judge was compelled to proclaim her worth in such a public, undeniable way? The energy in the hall thickened, a suspenseful pause before the next act of history would unfold. Cameras swiveled, people leaned closer, and even the quietest observer could sense it. Something monumental was unfolding. And as the echoes of Gelpí's words faded, one thought lingered in every mind, an electrifying question that demanded an answer. What had led a federal judge to recognize her in this way, and why it matters for the future of American politics, was just beginning. The applause had barely faded when the weight of the moment began to sink in. Across the nation, pundits and commentators debated the significance of Judge Gelpí's declaration. For some, it was a simple accolade, a passing acknowledgement of a rising political figure. But for those paying attention to the pulse of American politics, it was seismic. Jasmine Crockett had emerged not in a vacuum, but in the eye of a storm. A nation wrestling with questions of identity, justice, and the kind of leadership it demanded in turbulent times. The political climate had never been more charged. Heated debates over immigration, voting rights, and social equity had split the country into factions that measured loyalty as much by ideology as by action. Opponents of Crockett had been relentless, casting doubt on her experience, scrutinizing her every move, and spinning narratives designed to undermine her credibility. Headlines questioned whether she was ready to shoulder the weight of national leadership. Talk shows dissected her speeches, replaying moments out of context, hoping to catch a slip or a hesitation. Even within progressive circles, whispers circulated. Could she navigate a landscape so fraught with partisan tension and entrenched power? Yet Crockett had never been one to shrink from a challenge. Every setback, every questioning glance, every attempt to belittle her only sharpened her resolve. What critics saw as vulnerability, she turned into fuel. What skeptics dismissed as inexperience, she transformed into vision and strategy. Her recent legislative victories, battles for equitable housing, criminal justice reform, and economic access, had begun to tilt the balance of public perception. In each arena, she demonstrated not only competence but the moral courage to confront entrenched systems of inequality. Meanwhile, the media buzzed with tension. Social feeds erupted with contrasting reactions, admiration clashing with doubt, hope sparring with cynicism. Editors debated whether to frame her recognition as a triumph of meritocracy or a political moment designed to rally support. And amidst all this, the nation's eyes were on her. Every speech, every public appearance, every carefully crafted statement carried weight. It was no longer just about policy. It was about proving that integrity and vision could prevail where cynicism and obstruction often dominated. What she did next would not only silence critics but shift the conversation across the country. The stakes were no longer local, no longer confined to committee hearings or press releases. This was a moment that touched identity, pride, and the promise of possibility. Americans were beginning to see in real time how a leader could rise above discord, embody values, and inspire change in ways that reverberated far beyond the halls of government. And yet the drama was far from over. For every supporter who cheered, there was a critic waiting, a political adversary scheming, a media outlet primed to challenge, and a nation still uncertain about which vision of leadership it wanted to embrace. The tension was electric, almost unbearable, like a nation collectively holding its breath. Every glance at a news ticker, every notification, every social post was a reminder. The narrative was still being written. In the midst of all this, one truth became unmistakably clear. Jasmine Crockett was no ordinary politician. She had entered the arena fully aware of the scrutiny, the challenges, and the stakes. And as the spotlight focused on her, it became evident that what was about to happen next, her defining moment, would not just answer questions. It would redefine the conversation itself, leaving critics scrambling and supporters inspired, and setting the stage for a confrontation that would captivate the nation. Behind every meteoric rise, there is always resistance, faces in the shadows waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For Jasmine Crockett, those faces were all too real. Political adversaries, commentators with gleaming platforms, and opportunistic rivals had spent years scrutinizing her every word, dissecting her every move, and casting doubt on her legitimacy. Their tactics were subtle to some, brazen to others, but always rooted in a belief that they could control the narrative. They thrived on fear, on distraction, on the illusion that charisma and competence alone were insufficient for leadership. One prominent critic, a seasoned politician with a reputation for ruthless strategy, had publicly questioned Crockett's experience, framing her victories as lucky coincidences rather than hard-fought battles of principle. On televised debates, he leaned forward, smirk in place, casting veiled doubts about her capacity to navigate national politics. Behind the cameras, his team circulated talking points, aiming to reduce her story to sound bites that could be weaponized against her. They called her idealistic, naive, even out of touch, terms meant to erode confidence and cultivate doubt among undecided voters. In the media arena, opinion writers painted Crockett as a figure propelled more by identity than by accomplishment. Headlines hinted at controversy where none existed, and editorial panels debated whether her rise was deserved or the product of political optics. Every misstep, every pause in speech, every carefully measured gesture was scrutinized as evidence of weakness. Social media trolls amplified these narratives with relentless efficiency, turning personal attacks into viral spectacles. The opposition thrived on division, crafting a world where competence alone could never outweigh cynicism. And yet, in the midst of these attacks, the contrast could not have been more stark. Where critics wielded arrogance as armor, Crockett wielded composure as a shield. Where they sought to dominate the conversation with noise and spectacle, she answered with measured words, grounded in experience and unwavering principle. Their bluster, their theatrics only highlighted her steadiness. Every attempt to destabilize her inadvertently showcased the qualities they sought to diminish: intelligence, courage, and unshakable poise. Some adversaries underestimated her outright, seeing her youth and energy as liabilities rather than assets. They assumed that public scrutiny would break her, that the weight of relentless critique would force her to retreat. Yet Crockett's trajectory had been forged in adversity. She had faced skepticism before, navigated systemic bias, and persisted when the odds seemed stacked against her. Her very survival in these arenas became a testament to her resilience, a quiet but unyielding counterpoint to the chaos her opponents manufactured. And hypocrisy lingered like a shadow over the critics' own records. Many who doubted her integrity had themselves skirted transparency or leveraged public sentiment for personal gain. They preached experience while ignoring their failures, condemned idealism while embracing cynicism, and claimed moral authority while bending rules to suit ambition. Their contradictions, glaring to anyone paying attention, served as a foil to Crockett's authenticity. Every public attack became a mirror reflecting their own insecurity and opportunism, a contrast that only magnified the righteousness of her journey. Their missteps created an unintended narrative, a stage perfectly set for Crockett to rise. Every smear, every insinuation, every calculated critique became fuel, ammunition for the argument she would eventually make without uttering a single word of anger. The very energy spent trying to pull her down was being stored, waiting for the moment when she would channel it into a decisive, undeniable force. And as the critics sharpened their knives and polished their talking points, the nation watched in tension. Some saw only the clash of personalities, the spectacle of conflict. Few realized the deeper story unfolding beneath the surface, a tale of integrity and composure rising against arrogance and hypocrisy. Each attack, each doubting whisper, each cynical headline was adding to a pressure that Crockett would eventually transform into triumph. Little did they know, their attacks would become the fuel for her most powerful moment yet. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin under the glare of headlines or the scrutiny of national attention. It began in quiet neighborhoods where resilience was not optional, where each day demanded grit, determination, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Born into a community that understood struggle intimately, she learned early that leadership was not a title. It was action, sacrifice, and a commitment to lifting others while navigating life's relentless challenges. From the start, Crockett displayed a clarity of vision that belied her years, a sense of responsibility to something larger than herself. Her early life was punctuated by experiences that would shape not just her ambitions, but her moral compass. Family hardships, financial uncertainty, and the subtle yet persistent pressures of societal expectations tested her at every turn. Yet through every setback, she discovered an unshakable truth. Adversity could be a forge, and she could emerge stronger, more focused, more committed to justice. Teachers and mentors recall a young Crockett who listened intently, questioned fearlessly, and refused to accept limitations imposed by circumstance or expectation. Those formative years planted the seeds of a leadership style defined by empathy, intelligence, and resilience. Her journey into law and public service was not linear. Crockett faced systemic barriers, skepticism from peers, and moments when the path forward seemed unclear. Scholarships, late-night study sessions, and sacrifices that went unnoticed by the world became routine. She watched friends and colleagues succumb to discouragement, yet she pressed forward, understanding that the stakes were higher than personal ambition. Every hurdle she overcame strengthened her capacity to lead with both competence and compassion. It was in these moments, grappling with injustice firsthand, advocating for peers, and confronting inequities, that her signature blend of moral clarity and strategic acumen took shape. Crockett's career became a testament to tireless dedication. Early victories in local advocacy and legislative initiatives showcased not only her intelligence but her ability to navigate complexity with grace. She fought for equitable housing policies in neighborhoods long neglected, championed reforms in criminal justice where bias had gone unchecked, and gave voice to communities too often silenced. Each success was hard-earned, a product of negotiation, persistence, and an unyielding commitment to principle. Her opponents might have labeled her idealistic, but those closest to the work recognized the precision and pragmatism behind her vision. Alongside these professional accomplishments were personal sacrifices that rarely make the evening news. Long hours, missed family moments, and the constant scrutiny that comes with public service tested her resolve. Critics assumed such pressures would wear her down, that ambition coupled with idealism was a recipe for burnout. Instead, Crockett transformed sacrifice into strength. Every late-night meeting, every courtroom appearance, every legislative debate reinforced her ability to endure pressure while keeping her moral compass firmly in place. Her resilience was matched by her empathy. Crockett understood that leadership was not about individual accolades but about lifting communities, amplifying voices, and ensuring that policy translated into real-world impact. She cultivated a listening ear for constituents, a mentorship approach for younger colleagues, and a steadfast dedication to justice that transcended party lines. Her reputation grew not because she sought fame, but because she embodied the qualities that others only claimed to hold: integrity, courage, and a refusal to compromise on principle even when the spotlight was harshest. Key victories marked milestones in her journey. High-profile legislative successes, courtroom triumphs, and public service awards punctuated a career built on deliberate, consistent effort. Yet what made Crockett remarkable was not just the victories themselves, but the character she displayed while achieving them. Where opponents might have seized moments for self-aggrandizement, she remained composed, intentional, and focused on the larger mission. Observers noted a rare combination: strategic brilliance coupled with humility, assertiveness without aggression, and confidence rooted in competence rather than ego. By the time national attention began to turn toward her, Crockett had already become a figure defined by substance over spectacle. Her past, shaped by hardship, honed through experience, and tested in arenas where stakes were high, prepared her to face scrutiny with calm, to navigate opposition with skill, and to rise above narratives designed to diminish her impact. She had learned to turn every challenge into an opportunity, every criticism into a lesson, and every obstacle into a stepping stone toward leadership grounded in principle. Her story resonated not only because of her achievements, but because of her humanity. Audiences could see themselves in her journey, the struggles, the perseverance, the quiet victories that rarely make headlines. Her path symbolized hope for those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or doubted, offering proof that diligence, integrity, and resilience could break through systemic barriers. Crockett's life and career became an inspirational template, a narrative that affirmed identity, ambition, and the power of unwavering commitment to justice. Her past prepared her for the moment that would captivate the nation. Now it was time for history to take note. The lights of the town hall glared down like interrogators, illuminating every gesture, every twitch, every bead of sweat. The room was packed, constituents, press, and cameras trained on the stage as if the next words might alter history itself. Crockett's opponents had arrived armed with pointed questions, designed to test her knowledge, her composure, and her resolve. From the opening moments, the tension was electric. Whispers of anticipation rippled through the audience, the collective breath of a room waiting for conflict to erupt. The first question came like a lightning strike. "Representative Crockett," an adversary began, voice edged with insinuation, "how can we trust that your policies on economic reform won't destabilize the very communities you claim to protect?" The words hung in the air, heavy with doubt, calculated to provoke hesitation. Around the room, journalists scribbled furiously, some leaning in, some holding back judgment. Opponents nodded to one another, convinced they had landed a psychological blow, expecting to see a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. But Crockett remained calm. Her voice was steady, measured, each syllable deliberate. She acknowledged the complexity of the issue, addressed the concerns of everyday citizens, and outlined practical, evidence-based solutions without flinching under the scrutiny. Her intellect was on display, yes, but it was paired with emotional intelligence, a recognition that policy is not only about statistics, but about human lives, livelihoods, and dignity. Every carefully chosen word underscored the contrast between her composure and her opponent's aggression. As the debate escalated, the questions grew sharper. Another adversary leaned forward, tone dripping with skepticism. "Some say your focus on social equity overlooks economic realities. How do you respond to critics who call your approach idealistic?" A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience, the tension thickening. Yet Crockett met each challenge with the same poise, her answers layering logic with empathy, presenting scenarios, data, and moral reasoning in a seamless flow. Her opponents shifted in their seats, their confident smirks faltering as the room began to lean in her direction. The energy was taut, a live wire of expectation. Every counterpoint from her critics revealed cracks in their arguments, subtle yet undeniable. They raised voices, gestured emphatically, tried to dominate the narrative, but the more they pushed, the more they highlighted the elegance of Crockett's approach. Each failed attempt to unsettle her became a testament to her preparation, resilience, and strategic acumen. Audience members exchanged glances, a mix of awe and disbelief, sensing that the balance of power in the room was shifting. At one point, an opponent unleashed a rapid series of assertions, aiming to overwhelm her with the weight of national controversy. The pace was relentless, the delivery sharp and aggressive. Yet Crockett paused, not out of hesitation, but to measure her response, to let clarity and principle guide her words. When she finally spoke, it was with precision and authority, addressing every point without being rattled and reframing the debate around solutions and values. The contrast was stark. Where others relied on volume and theatrics, she relied on substance and integrity. The room leaned closer. Cameras panned, capturing the ripple of realization across the audience. Some opponents muttered under their breath, their confidence crumbling under the clarity of her answers. Members of the press whispered to each other, sensing a turning point, a moment that might redefine the narrative. And all the while, Crockett remained composed, her eyes steady, voice unwavering, projecting both authority and empathy. The tension reached a crescendo. The room held its collective breath, the nation watching in real time as a confrontation that had seemed inevitable shifted in direction. Every argument thrown against her had been met with intelligence, dignity, and unshakable resolve. And then, with a single statement, she turned the room and the nation on its head. The room went silent. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if time itself had paused. The collective anticipation of hundreds of eyes, cameras, and minds focused on a single figure, Jasmine Crockett. She straightened her posture, allowed herself a measured inhale, and then, with the precision of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment, she began to speak. Her voice carried across the hall, calm but unwavering, deliberate yet compelling, as if every syllable had been chosen to cut through noise, distraction, and doubt. "Let me be clear," she said, pausing to let the words sink in, her gaze sweeping the audience and the cameras alike. Leadership is not measured by how loudly one can dominate a debate, or how skillfully one can evade responsibility. It is measured by the courage to confront inequity, the clarity to craft solutions, and the commitment to serve the people, even when the odds are stacked against you. Her words were met with a murmur that quickly grew, a subtle, involuntary acknowledgement from the audience that something profound was unfolding. She outlined her recent legislative successes with precision, bills that had reformed local housing policy, initiatives that addressed systemic inequalities, and programs that offered tangible opportunities for underrepresented communities. She didn't boast. She stated facts, punctuated with examples that humanized the data. A single pause, a careful inflection, and the room leaned in, listening not just to the policy but to the promise behind it, the promise that leadership could be principled, practical, and deeply human all at once. Her opponents shifted in their seats, attempting feigned confidence, but cracks began to appear. Words that had once been delivered with smug assurance faltered under the weight of Crockett's clarity. Each argument she addressed with poise and logic, leaving them grasping for footing. Their tactics, which relied on doubt and theatrics, could not compete with her combination of intellect, empathy, and moral authority. The contrast was undeniable, and the room responded, the energy shifting palpably from tension to admiration. Crockett paused again, allowing a beat to hang, the silence stretching into dramatic tension. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, the ripple of realization spreading across the faces in the crowd. "I stand not for headlines, not for approval, and certainly not for partisan victory," she said, voice rising with controlled intensity. "I stand for the communities who demand fairness, for the citizens whose voices have been overlooked, and for a vision of leadership that honors truth over theatrics, justice over cynicism, and action over rhetoric." The words resonated, landing like a series of quiet, inescapable truths. Social media, already buzzing, erupted. Phones lit up with notifications. Tweets began trending before the final syllables had left the stage. Hashtags like Crockett Rising, Integrity in Action, and Leadership Redefined surged, digital applause echoing the approval in the room. Video clips of her statements were shared, looped, and dissected across platforms, each iteration amplifying her presence and the potency of her message. Analysts called it a turning point. Commentators praised her restraint, insight, and moral clarity. Memes began to circulate, not mocking but celebratory, portraying her calm authority as a foil to the flustered opposition. Even seasoned journalists found themselves caught in the moment, their scripts rewritten mid-broadcast. Experts on political panels leaned forward, acknowledging not just the substance of her message but the theatrical mastery of delivery. Some admitted, often reluctantly, that what had seemed like a routine debate had transformed into a masterclass in composure, persuasion, and authentic leadership. The crowd's reaction mirrored the online fervor. Standing ovations erupted, not orchestrated but organic, a collective recognition of the gravity of the moment. Constituents who had doubted, critics who had sneered, and even neutral observers could not deny the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Each pause, each carefully measured word, Each strategic beat built upon the last, creating a crescendo that left the opposition visibly unsettled. Their confidence faltered as they realized that the narrative they had sought to control was slipping through their fingers, reshaped by someone who had neither arrogance nor need for theatrics, only clarity, courage, and conviction. Her rhetorical precision was matched by her emotional intelligence. She acknowledged the challenges faced by communities, the doubts of skeptics, and the complexities of governance. She did not belittle her opponents nor indulge in personal attacks. Instead, she transformed their criticisms into opportunities to illuminate principles, values, and actionable solutions. By reframing every challenge as a lesson in justice and leadership, she elevated the discourse, creating a moment that was as emotionally satisfying as it was politically strategic. Every observer could sense it. A shift had occurred. The opposition had attempted to dominate, to unsettle, and to undermine. But Crockett had done something far more difficult and far more powerful. She had asserted authority not through aggression, but through composure, not through spectacle, but through substance, not through noise, but through truth. The hall seemed to pulse with collective recognition, the kind of awe that arises when someone transforms pressure into triumph, with seeming effortlessness. As cameras panned, capturing the expressions of journalists, constituents, and political peers alike, one thing became undeniable. The nation was witnessing a defining moment. Her words reverberated far beyond the hall. Across screens, social feeds, and news cycles, analysts debated the implications. Influencers amplified the message, and everyday citizens shared, retweeted, and commented, turning the moment into a viral testament to what principled leadership could achieve. And yet, even as applause filled the hall and screens across the nation lit up, the story was not finished. The opposition, rattled but unwilling to surrender, retreated to regroup, their earlier tactics rendered ineffective. The media churned out analysis, dissecting the strategy and impact, but Crockett's composure remained intact, her mission undeterred. She had not just delivered a rebuttal, she had reshaped the conversation, reframed the narrative, and solidified her position as a rising force in American politics. Her words were just the beginning. The aftermath would shock even her harshest critics. The moment Crockett spoke, the nation seemed to exhale and then immediately lean in, riveted by the force of her presence and clarity. Within minutes, social media erupted. Video clips of her mic drop statements circulated across platforms, each replay amplifying her authority. Hashtags like Sierra Crockett Rising, Our Leadership Redefined, and Integrity in Action surged to the top of trending lists as millions shared, commented, and celebrated her composure and vision. Memes emerged not to mock but to honor, a rare phenomenon where admiration eclipsed cynicism, and the internet became a stage for collective recognition. Political commentators, some long accustomed to framing her as a rising but untested figure, were forced to recalibrate. Panels dissected her strategy, praising not only the content of her words but the execution, the pause, the tone, the moral gravity that set her apart from the theatrics of her opponents. Opinion writers revisited old assumptions, acknowledging that Crockett's rise was no accident. Her leadership embodied both substance and spectacle, intellect and empathy. In conservative outlets, some grudgingly admitted her clarity had shifted the narrative. Even pundits known for sharp critique could not ignore the breadth of her influence, the viral momentum she had generated, and the subtle power she wielded in reshaping public perception. Celebrity endorsements followed almost immediately. Public figures praised her not simply for policy wins, but for her integrity, her poise, and the way she had reframed the debate. Tweets, video statements, and Instagram posts celebrated Crockett as a symbol of leadership defined by courage and principle. These high-profile validations added weight to her narrative, demonstrating that her reach extended beyond partisan or geographic boundaries. Every shared clip, every retweet, every public commendation became a wave in a growing tide of recognition. Meanwhile, her political opponents scrambled. Analysts noted the desperation in their messaging. Reactive statements, hastily written op-eds, and social media attacks that had once landed with force now fell flat. Their carefully constructed narratives, built on doubt and critique, were unraveling in real time. They had underestimated not only Crockett's intellect, but her ability to turn scrutiny into an asset, criticism into a stage for demonstrating competence, empathy, and vision. Each attempt to regain control of the story only amplified her momentum, inadvertently contributing to the narrative of a leader undeterred by opposition. Conversations among constituents took on a new intensity. Town halls, local discussions, and community forums buzzed with references to her performance. People debated her policies, celebrated her resilience, and shared personal stories of how her work had tangibly affected their lives. For many, Crockett had become more than a politician. She was a figure of validation, a reminder that integrity and service could still thrive in the public arena. Her ability to connect policy with human impact created an emotional resonance that statistics alone could never achieve. Media coverage extended beyond politics. Mainstream outlets and cultural platforms alike highlighted her rise, analyzing how her composure and message had disrupted typical political narratives. In classrooms, discussion groups, and civic circles, Crockett's approach became a case study in leadership, strategic communication, and ethical courage. The ripple effect was tangible. Even those who disagreed with her policy positions could not deny the power of her delivery, the thoughtfulness of her solutions, and the symbolic significance of her emergence as a nationally recognized figure. And yet, the drama was far from concluded. While supporters rallied, opponents searched for angles to regain traction, drafting statements and strategizing new attacks. The contrast between Crockett's steady, deliberate approach and the frantic energy of her critics created a tension that heightened the stakes. The momentum she had generated now carried weight. The narrative of her competence, integrity, and vision was firmly in the public consciousness, making it increasingly difficult for detractors to control the discourse. Across social media, newsrooms, and dinner tables, one message became clear. Crockett had shifted the conversation. She had not merely survived scrutiny, she had transformed it into a stage for demonstrating her leadership, her values, and her readiness to operate at the highest levels. Every viral clip, every endorsement, every analysis reinforced the same point. This was a figure whose influence was expanding in scope and depth, whose presence demanded attention, and whose story inspired hope for those who longed for principled leadership. But the true measure of her impact wasn't online. It was in the change she inspired for everyday Americans. As the reverberations of the debate and its viral aftermath settled, a deeper truth began to emerge. Jasmine Crockett's moment was not just about recognition, applause, or social media accolades. It was about the power of steadfastness, integrity, and courage in the face of relentless scrutiny. Every criticism she had endured, every obstacle she had overcome, and every calculated attack from her opponents had converged to create a defining lesson in leadership. Dignity and service are more enduring than noise, cynicism, or spectacle. Crockett's ability to transform scrutiny into a platform for principle became a symbol that extended far beyond political calculations. For those watching from communities long overlooked, for immigrants navigating skepticism, for individuals whose identities had been questioned or dismissed, her composure and clarity were not abstract qualities. They were proof that persistence and moral courage could rewrite narratives. In her journey, the ordinary citizen could see the extraordinary, a person who rose not through aggression or opportunism, but through measured action, empathy, and unwavering dedication. Her story reframed what it means to wield influence. While her opponents had relied on fear, exaggeration, and the theatrics of conflict, Crockett relied on truth, preparation, and a deep understanding of her constituents' needs. She showed that leadership is not the loudest voice in the room, but the voice that speaks with clarity, principle, and vision. Each policy proposal, each public statement, and each calculated pause in her debate performance demonstrated that courage often manifests quietly, yet leaves an indelible mark on those paying attention. The emotional resonance of her moment extended far beyond the stage. Families in living rooms across the nation witnessed a leader who did not yield to intimidation, who did not succumb to the weight of expectation, and who transformed adversity into opportunity. Students, activists, and professionals found inspiration in her example, internalizing a message that had long been muted in the cacophony of political spectacle. Resilience matters. Principle matters, and service matters. Leadership rooted in empathy and action can ripple outward in ways that social media algorithms cannot capture, but that society feels deeply. Crockett's recognition by Judge Gustavo Gelpí, amplified by the debate and the viral reaction, became more than a moment, it became a movement of hope. It reminded the nation that leadership grounded in character can stand resilient against cynicism, that authenticity can prevail against orchestrated narratives, and that every voice, when exercised with conviction, carries the potential to inspire change. Her journey validated the experiences of those who had been overlooked, marginalized, or doubted, sending a signal that perseverance and principled action are not just admirable traits, they are transformative forces. The moral clarity of her story also offered a lesson in accountability. Crockett demonstrated that influence is most potent when wielded responsibly, when victories are leveraged not for personal gain, but for public good. She turned recognition into responsibility, applause into action, and visibility into empowerment. In doing so, she elevated the conversation about leadership, reminding viewers that true power is inseparable from integrity and service. For those who had followed her rise, the emotional payoff was profound. The narrative arc, from doubt and opposition to recognition and respect, was not simply a story of political success. It was a story of humanity prevailing in an arena often dominated by spectacle, ego, and division. It showed that courage, intellect, and empathy can redefine expectations, reshape perceptions, and inspire a nation to believe in the possibilities of principled leadership. Her journey shows that one voice, grounded in principle, can change the nation, but the story doesn't end here. The echoes of Judge Gustavo Gelpí's words still resonate. Jasmine Crockett, a rising star. A single declaration, yet it captured years of struggle, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice. From quiet neighborhoods to the national stage, her journey reminds us that leadership is earned through integrity, courage, and service, not by the loudest voice or the flashiest headlines. She has shown that perseverance, principle, and dedication can overcome doubt, opposition, and adversity, inspiring admiration not just in supporters, but even in those who once questioned her path. Today, her story is more than a political moment. It is a call to recognize the power each individual holds to create change. Her composure, her moral clarity, and her ability to rise above cynicism are lessons for everyone striving to make a difference. Every policy she champions, every debate she navigates, and every life she touches amplifies a larger truth. Leadership rooted in values and empathy has the power to transform communities, reshape conversations, and ignite hope. And now it's your turn. Be part of this movement. Stand for what matters. Share her story. Amplify voices that inspire and engage in conversations that uplift communities and defend justice. Witness history unfold, not as a passive observer, but as someone who recognizes the power of integrity, perseverance, and action. Jasmine Crockett's rise reminds us all that one person, grounded in principle, can shift the nation, and that together, we can shape a future defined by dignity, courage, and possibility. The moment has arrived to carry her example forward, to participate, to inspire, and to make your voice count.